Why you feel empty, even when nothing is wrong. There is a strange kind of quietness that settles inside a person, a silence not caused by tragedy or loss, but by something softer, harder to name. A hollowness that appears even when life looks fine from the outside. When nothing is broken, yet something still feels missing. It's the moment when daily life feels muted, when laughter echoes faintly, when joy arrives but doesn't quite land. A sense of drifting, as if you are watching your own life from a distance, present, yet not fully here. This emptiness is not loud. It does not scream. It simply exists, quietly asking questions you don't know how to answer. Not because something is wrong, but because something within you has gone silent. There is a particular kind of emptiness that does not arrive with a warning. It slips in quietly, almost politely, as if it doesn't want to disturb anything, not your routines, not your relationships, not the outer world that appears perfectly fine. It is a hollow that forms in the silent spaces between your thoughts, in the moments when life pauses for just a breath, when you are alone or with others, or in the middle of a normal day doing normal things. And suddenly there is a faint distance between you and everything else. This emptiness does not scream, does not ache sharply, does not demand immediate attention. It is gentle in its presence, but persistent in its weight. A quiet pulling inward, a soft retreat from your own life. It feels like muted colors on a canvas that once felt vibrant, like the world around you is slightly blurred, not enough to alarm you, but enough to remind you that something is missing. Conversations feel lighter, as if your responses arrive a fraction of a second late. Moments that should feel warm land softly, as though padded by an invisible layer between you and your own emotions. You smile when you are supposed to. You nod in all the right places. You move through your days with practiced familiarity. Yet inside, something is still. Something is quiet. Something is absent. People around you may not notice. Everything in your life may look right. Your routines still function, your responsibilities are still fulfilled, and your face knows how to perform the motions of being okay. Nothing is wrong. And yet, the absence of feeling becomes its own kind of presence. It shows up in small, disorienting ways. You may find yourself staring at the ceiling at night, not sad, not anxious, just suspended, as if your mind is neither here nor there. Or you go through your daily tasks, checking boxes, moving forward, but without the sense of actually being alive within them. It might feel like drifting, not sinking, not drowning, just floating in a place where the water is calm, but the sky feels far away. Sometimes the emptiness feels like a locked room inside you. A room you used to visit without hesitation. The room where your excitement lived, your curiosity, your softness, your spark. Now it feels sealed, as if someone turned the key and forgot to return. You may think, I should feel grateful. I should feel happy. There is nothing wrong. And still, the hollow remains. Not answering, not expanding, simply existing. It is confusing to feel this way when life is stable. Confusing to sense a void in moments where joy should bloom. Confusing to be surrounded by people and yet feel untouched by their warmth. This emptiness is subtle, but it carries a quiet truth. It is not the absence of life, but the absence of connection to life. It is the sense of watching yourself from a distance, as though you are both the actor and the observer, present, yet strangely disconnected from your own experience. The quiet hollow forms slowly. It gathers in the spaces where feelings once flowed freely, in the corners where emotions used to rise instinctively. It is not a failure or a flaw, not a sign of weakness or instability. It is simply the mind's way of signaling that something inside has gone quiet, that a part of you is out of reach. This chapter is the beginning of that recognition. the acknowledgement of an emptiness that is both familiar and confusing, gentle yet heavy, quiet yet undeniable. It is the first step in understanding why a person can feel empty even when nothing appears wrong, why the hollow inside them is not a crisis, but a message, a subtle whisper, calling attention to the places within that have gone silent, waiting to be heard again. Emptiness rarely begins in adulthood. It is not born from a single moment, nor from a sudden collapse of emotion. It grows quietly, slowly, almost invisibly, woven into the early patterns of a life long before a person understands its shape. Many people first learn emptiness as children, in small, ordinary moments when their emotional world was not fully met. It could be the parent who provided everything except presence, the household where physical needs were met but emotional needs had no room to exist, the place where feelings were too loud, too inconvenient, or simply too unfamiliar for the adults to hold. So the child learned to hold themselves, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. They learned to swallow their excitement, to shrink their sadness, to mute their inner world in order to survive the outer one. Emptiness often begins as self-silencing. A child says, "Look what I made," and the moment is brushed aside. A child cries, "I'm scared," and the fear is dismissed. A child longs, "Be with me," and the request is met with distance or distraction, or a parent too burdened by their own wounds to notice. These small moments teach the child a quiet lesson, that certain emotions must be minimized, tucked away, managed alone. Over time, the child stops reaching outward and begins collapsing inward, not visibly, not dramatically, but steadily. The emptiness begins to take shape, not as a void, but as a silence around the self. For others, emptiness grows in childhoods marked by chaos, where emotional overstimulation forced the young mind to shut down. Conflict, volatility, unpredictability. These experiences lead the nervous system to retreat, to numb, to protect itself by disconnecting from feeling. A numb child becomes a numb adult, not by choice, but by adaptation. There are also those who grew up carrying too much. The caretakers in young bodies, the ones who comforted wounded parents, who mediated arguments, who understood too much, too early. These children learned to stretch themselves thin, to make room for everyone else's needs while their own needs receded into the background. Empty adults are often children who learned to fill everyone else and never learned how to fill themselves. For some, emptiness forms in adolescence, a time of shaping identity. This is when masking begins, when the world starts asking for performance instead of truth. Teenagers learn which parts of themselves are acceptable and which parts must stay hidden. They learn to curate their personality, to adapt, to charm, to blend. And in blending, they begin to lose the sharp edges of their emotional world. But emptiness begins not only in experiences of lack, it can also grow from years of emotional overextension, from being constantly on, from performing competence, stability, strength. People who carry the world on their shoulders eventually become hollow from the weight of it. And then there are individuals whose emptiness begins because they never learned to pause. Life taught them to achieve, to keep striving, to move from one goal to another without ever stopping to feel. Success became the distraction. Productivity became the identity. But emotions, unfelt, do not disappear. They simply fade into silence, leaving behind an echo where fullness used to live. In every story, emptiness begins as a response, an adaptation to environments that asked too much or offered too little. People blame themselves for feeling hollow, without realizing that emptiness is not a personal failure. It is evidence, a quiet record, of all the places where emotional nourishment never arrived. It is the result of years spent surviving instead of being seen. This chapter maps the quiet origins of the hollow within, not to assign blame, but to illuminate how emptiness grows slowly, patiently, in the spaces where the self was not fully held. Emptiness is not a personality flaw. It is not laziness, not indifference, not a lack of gratitude. It is a psychological response, a nervous system adaptation, a quiet survival strategy developed when feeling too much became unsafe, unsustainable, or simply overwhelming. To understand emptiness, you must first understand the body's language. The human nervous system is designed to protect. When danger is near, it activates fight or flight, racing heart, rising tension, the instinct to run or defend. But when the danger is emotional, when it comes from rejection, neglect, inconsistency, or chronic overwhelm, the body uses a different strategy. When the system learns that feeling is too painful, or that efforts to connect are met with nothingness, the brain activates a third response: freeze. Freeze is quiet. It is stillness. It is emotional shutdown. It is the biology of emptiness. This is not weakness. This is the nervous system protecting itself in the only way it knows how. By turning down the volume on emotions so the heart can continue functioning without breaking open each time. In psychology, this is known as emotional blunting, a state where the internal world feels distant, as though wrapped in layers of soft fabric. You can see life happening in front of you, but you feel only faint echoes, muted sensations. Neuroscience explains this numbness through the workings of the brain's alarm system. When emotional pain is constant, whether from childhood wounds, ongoing stress, relational instability, or even chronic self-criticism, the brain releases chemicals meant to dull sensation. This protective mechanism reduces intensity, but it also reduces vitality. It protects, but at the same time, it disconnects. Another psychological layer is dissociation, not the dramatic kind shown in films, but the everyday version, zoning out, feeling distant from your own body, moving through life on autopilot. This is the mind stepping away when emotions are too heavy, too complicated, or too numerous to hold all at once. People experiencing emptiness often describe it as feeling like a ghost of myself, watching life instead of living it, feeling present but not here. These descriptions are not exaggerations. They are the literal experience of a nervous system that has shifted into energy conservation mode. When the mind believes there is no reward in emotional expression, or that vulnerability leads to pain, it reduces access to feelings to keep the system stable. The psychology of emptiness is also tied to deactivation of the reward system. When dopamine pathways, the circuits responsible for motivation and joy, become understimulated due to chronic stress, emotional suppression, or long-term overwhelm, the ability to feel excitement becomes dulled. The world loses some of its color. Moments that once sparked joy now feel flat. This is why a person can look at their own life, their relationships, job, home, achievements, and think, I should feel something, but nothing rises. Numbness is not chosen. It is conditioned. Another psychological aspect is learned emotional minimalism. When someone grows up in an environment where emotional expression is discouraged, or where expressing needs leads to disappointment, the brain adapts by reducing expression altogether. Over years, the emotional muscles weaken like limbs that haven't been used. The result is not emptiness of personality, but emptiness of access. The emotional range is intact, just harder to reach. Emptiness is also linked to chronic self-regulation. People who have always managed their emotions alone. People who were never soothed, never mirrored, never emotionally held, develop an internal system that prioritizes efficiency over depth. Their nervous system becomes skilled at function, not feeling. This creates a life that works on the outside but feels muted on the inside. Psychologists call this functional numbness, the ability to operate, perform, manage, and move forward while emotionally disconnected from the experience of it all. It is the mind's attempt to protect the heart by hiding it. This chapter uncovers the biological and psychological mechanisms behind emotional emptiness, not to pathologize the person experiencing it, but to assure them of something profound. Their emptiness is not a failure of character, but a reflection of how deeply they once felt and how deeply they still need to feel. Numbness is not the absence of emotion, it is the nervous system curled around the heart, keeping it safe until it believes the world is gentle enough to allow feeling again. There is a particular kind of conflict that forms inside a person who feels empty. It is not loud. It is not chaotic. It is a quiet tug-of-war between two parts of the self, the part that wants to feel again, and the part that has grown afraid of feeling anything at all. This resistance is subtle. It is not always conscious. It shows up in the moments when emotion flickers at the edges of awareness and something inside pulls back, as if to say, "Not now. Not yet. It's safer this way." The longing to feel is real. There is a part of you that craves warmth, connection, aliveness. A part that remembers, however faintly, what it was like to experience joy without effort, to feel present in your own life, to laugh without analyzing the sound. But there is another part, older, more practiced, that has learned to fear the very thing you want. This part remembers the pain behind former emotions. It remembers the hurt that came from caring too much, the disappointment that followed hope, the vulnerability that once felt unbearable. So when emotion tries to return, this part of you tightens. It pulls the shutters closed. It dims the inner light before it has a chance to brighten. This is the resistance within, the protective instinct of a heart that believes numbness is safer than feeling. You may sense this conflict in the smallest moments. Someone offers affection, and instead of warmth, you feel distance. A moment of joy arrives, and instead of rising, you flatten. Sadness stirs, but instead of tears, you feel a heaviness with no shape. It is not that you don't want to feel. It is that your system has forgotten how to let feeling in without bracing for impact. There is often guilt wrapped inside this resistance. Why can't I feel? Why can't I be grateful? Why does everything feel muted when nothing is wrong? But guilt does not move the needle. If anything, it strengthens the resistance, because guilt is, in its own way, another emotion you've learned to turn down. The resistance also appears as detachment. You may withdraw from people, not because you don't care, but because caring requires emotional energy you no longer have. You may avoid meaningful conversations, preferring safe, surface-level exchanges where nothing is asked of your inner world. You might distract yourself, scrolling endlessly, keeping busy, immersing yourself in tasks that require focus but no emotional presence. This distraction is not avoidance of life, but avoidance of the deeper silence within you. And then there is the fear beneath it all, the fear that if you begin to feel again, you will be overwhelmed, that emotions will arrive too quickly, too strongly, too unpredictably, that once the numbness cracks, everything you've held back will spill out. You fear the return of pain just as much as you long for the return of joy. This inner resistance is not irrational. It is shaped by every moment in your life where feeling deeply was met with pain instead of support. It is shaped by every time you were told, directly or indirectly, to manage your emotions alone. It is shaped by every wound you had no space to feel. So now, when emptiness fills the space where emotion once lived, the resistance is not a malfunction. It is protection. The mind doing what it learned keeps you safe. There is also resistance to confronting the emptiness itself. Because emptiness is not empty, It holds everything unprocessed, everything unexpressed. Facing it means facing the parts of yourself that have been waiting in silence. So you hover in between, wanting to feel, but not wanting to open the door. Ready for change, but not ready for the vulnerability required. This chapter is about that space, the in-between, the internal tug-of-war, the quiet conflict that reveals just how much the heart has endured. It is the recognition that the resistance within is not the enemy. It is the oldest part of you, the part that learned to survive when life felt too heavy, the part that protected you when you had no one else to do it. And now, even as you long to feel again, that part still believes it is saving you. The turning point rarely arrives with drama. There is no loud revelation, no sudden burst of clarity. Instead, it comes quietly, in a moment that feels unremarkable to anyone else, but unmistakable to you. Sometimes it happens in the middle of an ordinary day. You're washing dishes, scrolling through your phone, sitting in traffic, and suddenly, the emptiness that has been living inside you feels less like a fog and more like a message. A realization flickers. This isn't who I am. This isn't what life is supposed to feel like. Something inside me has dimmed, not broken, not gone, just dimmed. The recognition is small, but powerful. It interrupts the autopilot you've been living in and brings you back into your body, even if only for a breath. For others, the moment arrives through contrast. A single unexpected feeling slips through the cracks, a moment of genuine laughter, a sudden wave of tenderness, a quiet ache while watching a sunset, or the sting of tears you didn't expect to come. It is not the emotion itself that matters, but the shock of realizing you can still feel something, that your inner world has not disappeared. It has only gone quiet. Sometimes recognition arrives through another person. A friend asks how you're doing with real concern, and you find yourself unable to answer. Not because you want to hide, but because you genuinely don't know. And in that not knowing, you sense the truth. You've been disconnected for so long that you no longer have language for your inner world. This realization isn't painful in the dramatic sense. It's softer than that. A weighted awareness settling into your chest. The understanding that the emptiness is not a mystery but a signal, a sign of emotional fatigue, of long-term self-silencing, of years spent surviving instead of feeling. The turning point often begins as a simple shift in perspective. Instead of blaming yourself for the emptiness, instead of calling it laziness, ingratitude, or personal failure, you begin to consider a different possibility. Maybe something inside me is tired. Maybe something inside me has been holding too much for too long. Maybe emptiness is not the absence of emotion, but the exhaustion from carrying too many emotions alone. In that moment, the emptiness changes shape. It is no longer a void you fear, but a landscape you begin to understand. A quiet room within you that has been neglected, not abandoned. For some, the recognition comes through a moment of contrast in relationships. Perhaps someone shows you a small act of care and it lands differently, like a reminder of something you forgot you needed. Or maybe someone's closeness feels overwhelming in a way you didn't expect, revealing the depth of your disconnection. You realize how long it has been since you felt held, or understood, or emotionally mirrored. Recognition can also come through exhaustion, a fatigue that is not physical, but soul-deep. A weariness from pretending to function, from going through the motions, from floating instead of living. This exhaustion whispers, something has to change. Not dramatically, not urgently, but gently. A quiet call toward reconnection. In this chapter, the person begins to see emptiness for what it truly is. Not a personality trait, not a flaw, but a delayed signal from the emotional system. A request for pause, a request for softness, a request to return to oneself. The turning point is the moment when you stop fighting the emptiness and begin listening to it. It is the beginning of understanding that the hollow inside you is not a dead space. It is a waiting space, a space that has been trying to get your attention in the only way it knows how, by going silent. Recognition does not fix anything. It does not solve the emptiness, but it opens a door to awareness, to curiosity, to the possibility of reconnecting. It is the moment when the emptiness stops being something you suffer and becomes something you understand. Healing from emptiness is not a dramatic awakening. It does not arrive as a sudden flood of emotion or a grand realization that changes everything at once. It begins quietly, with small shifts, soft openings, moments so subtle that you barely notice them at first. It starts with presence, not forced presence, not mindfulness performed out of obligation, but the gentle return of awareness to the body, to this moment, to yourself. You begin to notice things again, the texture of your breath, the way sunlight settles on a wall, the faint warmth of your own skin. Noticing is the first way the emptiness begins to soften. Inside the empty space, the inner room that has felt abandoned for so long, something begins to stir. Not emotion, not yet, but the faintest sense of being here, of existing, of occupying your own life. Healing is not about forcing feelings to return. It is about allowing them to surface when the body finally feels safe enough. Emptiness is often a result of the nervous system shutting down after years of emotional overload. So the inner room fills slowly, the same way a home opens its windows after a long winter. Sometimes, the first thing to return is curiosity. A small question arises. What is happening inside me? What do I feel right now? What have I been avoiding? These questions are not meant to be answered immediately. They are simply invitations, gentle knocks on the door of your emotional world. Other times, the first thing to return is tenderness. You find yourself offering small acts of care to your own mind, your own heart, even if you don't fully understand why. You rest when you're tired. You pause when you're overwhelmed. You soften the voice inside you that once demanded so much. This softness creates space, and slowly, feeling begins to enter again. Healing also comes through connection, not necessarily with others at first, but with yourself. The parts of you that have been quiet for so long begin to reintroduce themselves, not with loud emotion, but with gentle presence, a faint spark of joy, a soft tug of sadness, a sudden wave of longing. These moments may feel small, but they are proof that the emptiness is shifting. The room within you is no longer barren. It is being lived in again. Healing often arrives in the form of attunement. You begin to notice not only what you feel, but what you need. You start recognizing your boundaries, your desires, your exhaustion, your hunger for meaning. The emptiness was never lack. It was suppression. A quiet backlog of everything you did not have the space to feel. Now, slowly, the capacity to feel begins to return. This return is fragile at first. It must be treated gently. Emotions that reappear may feel too soft to hold, too fleeting to trust. But with each arrival, the nervous system learns something new, that feeling is possible without breaking, that emotion can be safe, that the inner room can hold what it once had to hide. Healing is not linear. There will be days when emptiness returns, when the room goes quiet again. But the difference now is that you recognize it. You understand why the silence comes, and instead of fearing it, you approach it with patience, as if visiting an old friend who speaks in whispers. The inner room fills not with intensity, but with depth, with small truths rediscovered, with the slow rebuilding of inner connection, with the warmth that comes from allowing yourself to exist without needing to be productive or perfect or emotionally brilliant. And gradually, you begin to feel not just the presence of emotion, but the presence of yourself. the self that went quiet, the self that retreated, the self that waited patiently for the world inside you to feel safe enough to open its door again. This chapter is not about arrival. It is about return. The slow, delicate return to your own inner life, to a room that is no longer empty, but becoming yours again. The softening does not happen all at once. It is not a dramatic transformation, not a sudden burst of feeling, not a moment where everything finally makes sense. It comes slowly, the way morning light slips into a dark room, quietly at first, almost unnoticed, until everything around you has subtly brightened. The emptiness doesn't vanish. It changes texture. It shifts from a hollow ache to a spacious calm. The room inside you, once silent, barren, untouched, now feels open, gentle, livable. A place where emotion can enter, linger, and rest without overwhelming you. This softening is not about filling every corner of your inner world with noise. It is about learning that emptiness is not always absence. Sometimes it is room for breath, room for reflection, room for feeling to return in its own time. You begin to sense yourself more fully, not in a dramatic way, but in small, grounding moments. The taste of food feels slightly richer. A laugh feels warmer in your chest. A sad song touches something it once could not reach. You catch yourself caring again, about small things, ordinary things, quiet things that once slipped past you unnoticed. These moments don't solve everything. They don't erase the years of numbness. But they remind you that emptiness was never the end. Only a pause, a place of waiting, a space between emotional chapters. Slowly, you begin to understand something important. Your emptiness was protecting you. It wasn't a failure. It was a form of care. A way your body and mind shielded you from emotional overload, from survival mode living, from a world that expected too much of you for far too long. When you see this, the shame surrounding your numbness begins to fall away. You no longer ask, "What's wrong with me?" Instead, you whisper, "Of course I felt that way. Here is why." And in that understanding, something softens even more. The quiet freedom of this chapter comes from realizing that feeling does not need to be loud to be real. You may never return to the emotional intensity you once had, and that is not a loss. It is a recalibration, a gentler way of existing. Your emotions have new boundaries now, new rhythms, new softness. There is a maturity in this softness, a steadiness, a calm form of depth that grows in the place where emptiness once lived. You begin to move through the world differently, less hurried, less overstimulated, less afraid of the quiet inside you. You understand now that the quiet is not a void. It is the foundation on which peace is built. Relationships begin to feel different too. You show up with a bit more presence, a bit more clarity. You listen not to respond, but to connect. And when others look into your eyes, they no longer see someone who is far away. They see someone returning, slowly, softly, home to themselves. The fear of losing feeling again may still linger, but it no longer dominates. It becomes a reminder of how deeply you once needed protection, and how far you have come in learning to live again. Over time, you realize that the softening is not about replacing emptiness, but about making room for both emptiness and fullness to coexist without conflict. You do not push feeling away. You do not chase it. You simply allow it, and it arises naturally like breath. This final chapter leaves you with a quieter understanding. Life is not meant to be constantly full. There will always be cycles, periods of depth, periods of quiet, periods of stillness where the inner world rests. You begin to trust these cycles. You begin to trust yourself. The emptiness, once frightening, now feels familiar. It becomes a place you can sit with, a place that no longer threatens you, a place that teaches you how to listen to your exhaustion, your needs, your changing emotional landscape. And in that listening, you discover a truth. Emptiness softens not when you try to fill it, but when you finally stop fighting its presence, when you learn to breathe inside it, when you allow it to teach you what it came to show you. Feelings return in waves, quiet, patient, steady. Not to overwhelm you, but to remind you that inside the quiet hollow there was always a life waiting to be lived again.